On a recent trip to Washington, we caught up with Dr. Eric Hoffman, who is the director of the Center for Genetic Medicine Research and James Clark Professor of Pediatrics at Children's National Medical Center. He is also a professor at the School of Medicine and Health Sciences, George Washington University. Dr. Hoffman has over 300 publications and is a highly cited scientist, particularly for his work in the muscular dystrophies.
Muscular dystrophy is a problem of muscles, and because of that, it's generally a problem of weakness, that being able to walk or to use muscles to the point where if you're so weak, you can no longer breathe or do activities of daily living. The most common type of muscular dystrophy has been well characterized for well over 100 years, which is Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Have you seen the Jerry Lewis telethon, perhaps, or other fundraisers that all focus on muscular dystrophy, and mostly this one type? It's the most common. And that's due to a gene disorder, a specific gene on the X chromosome that affects mostly males. And the boys are fine up until kindergarten or first grade, and then they just can't keep up with their peers. They can't go up, they're always the last up the stairs, so they can never really break into a run in gym class. And they're brought into a physician, and because it's relatively common, they'll just do a test, the same as a heart attack, to look for muscle guts in your blood, which is what they do when you have chest pain. See if any of your heart ends up in your blood, that means your heart has trouble. The same thing is for muscle, and they do this test called a creatine kinase test, simple blood test, and these kids will just have huge amounts of muscle in their blood, which means the muscle's actually dying, and it grows back, so muscle regenerates. Like if you walk too long or you lift too much weight, so you get sore. That sore is because you've destroyed some muscle, but it grows back. It grows back quite well. But through cycles of this degeneration and regeneration of muscle, you see a lot of evidence of that in the bloodstream. And unfortunately, what happens then with the passage of time is that the muscle just has more and more trouble growing back. And so they end up with what's called muscle wasting and weakness. So they're traditionally have been in a wheelchair by just 7 or 8 years of age, and then typically succumb to respiratory failure in their mid-teens. If a child is diagnosed, usually around 3 or 4 or 5 years of age, I think there's a lot of things that can be done. I mean, there's no magic bullet at this point. We're certainly working on therapeutics and cures. But there's lots of things that can be done, physical therapy, appropriate types of exercise, and then the other issues of everything from, dealing with school systems and state aid programs. And of course, now there's lots of parent groups that are wonderful, and lots of networking and a lot of interactions now between the foundations, the stakeholders, and the scientists and the governments. Everybody working towards the same end of helping these children. So there's certainly a lot that can and should be done if a child is newly diagnosed, and a lot of it can be quickly ascertained, even just through the internet. If there's a history in your family of muscular dystrophy, if you know of older relatives, particularly older male relatives that might have died quite young from muscle weakness, it's quite important to go see a professional, a medical geneticist or a genetic counselor. And many times just by looking at your family tree, they can tell you whether this is a problem or not for you and your future baby, or a risk. And oftentimes it's not. But if it is a risk, then there's certainly genetic testing that can be done and probably should be done. And again, the genetic counselors and the medical geneticists coordinate that. And so most communities, or certainly medical centers, now have quite active medical genetics and genetic counseling departments that are quite expert in this. Duchenne dystrophy is actually different. It's unique among all genetic disorders in that it has what's called a very high mutation rate. And again, it's related to the large size of the gene, but it means that, it's cosmic rays, they actually exist, things that come down from space, and they can hit a gene and cause a mutation, just like eating too much bacon and all these things you've heard about, nitrates. So all these things that cause low levels of mutations in genes are going to hit the dystrophin Duchenne muscular dystrophy gene 1,000 times more frequently. So it has this very high spontaneous mutation rate. So what that translates to is families can have a boy with Duchenne and actually not be at any higher risk in their next pregnancies because it was really just an egg that sustained that mutation and just the egg going to that boy. In other cases, there are full-fledged carriers, and there half the sons will be affected. And again, genetic testing and medical genetics can discern between those.